Hey, y'all. Welcome to Living the Jesus-Shaped Life podcast. We're going to be exploring what it truly means to live out the words, the ways, and the works of Jesus in our daily lives. I'm your host, James Wilson Jr., and I'm excited to have you on this journey with us. Welcome back to Living the Jesus-Shaped Life. I'm James Wilson Jr., and today I'm joined by Archie and Paul, and I feel like we're diving into a topic that's so relevant today. It's really, how do we navigate the rhythms of life? How do we navigate a culture that's constantly telling us to do and do more? And how do we balance that with our relationship with God and what He's called us to do? So today we're going to dive into just a topic that I feel is so relevant for where we are in our life, that's full of distractions. I know that everyone here can attest to this. All of our listeners, you've been pulled in many directions all at one time. Like, even as we're recording this, I haven't even eaten lunch yet because I feel like I've been pulled in so many directions, lots on my to-do list, and really trying to figure out, how do I show up my best self, and how do I actually do what God has called me to do? And so I want to talk about that today. And I'd love, Paul, when we were offline, you were talking about this a little bit. You were diving into it. And so I really want to open the conversation up for us, as we talk about a tool this episode of how we can live more of this Jesus-shaped life in a culture that feels so fast-paced.
Yeah, James. I mean, I think one of the challenges about taking on a Jesus-shaped life is that so many aspects of the way that Jesus lived his life is so countercultural to the way that our life is now. And I think that the topic that we're talking about today, which is really about the rhythms of life, is probably one of the areas where it's most countercultural. I think our culture in the West has a particular set of values about what productivity should look like, about what fruitfulness looks like, about what conscientiousness looks like in terms of work. And I think that if you are somebody who's considers yourself to be, productive and a conscientious and hardworking person, that there are certain values that we can end up buying into, which really takes the onus onto ourselves of certain things that Jesus was very clear really should be staying with the Lord. If you're asking yourself, of the things that I'm taking responsibility for, of all of the things that I'm taking responsibility for, what things should I be responsible for? And what things actually does the Bible say that God is responsible for? Most of us in our current culture are taking responsibility for all sorts of things that Jesus is actually very clear are God's responsibility. And in doing that, we end up basically spending a lot of our lives striving, burning ourselves out, probably causing mental illness of different kinds, getting ourselves into all kinds of difficulties and ruts. And so I think that's what we really are talking about today, isn't it? Is how do we practice the rhythms of life, of rest and work, of times of pruning and times of growth, these sorts of rhythms that Jesus taught on and modeled. How do we do them the Jesus way and not the world's way?
It's so good. So good. Archie, I'll let you get your first, just kind of, we're going to tag you in. How are you interacting with some of this?
Yeah, I think to Paul's point, if we proclaim Jesus as Lord of our life, then we're asking Him, right, to lead it, to direct it. And so we have to look at Jesus's life and the way in which He lived it, so that we can begin to model the way He lived. And some of that requires some surrendering of expectations that the world puts on us, or expectations that we put on ourselves, or even, unfortunately, in many cases, even our church ministries and our church members, if people are pastors or leaders in great capacities, laying down expectations. And so when I look at Scripture, For example, we can take Genesis 1, right? And when God created the heavens and the earth, we see that there is a morning and a night. And Jesus begins by explaining there was evening and then there was morning. And so
Yeah.
it paints a picture for us how for God there was the morning came out of the night,
Yeah.
out of a darkness, right? Even the whole creation, it was chaos, and then there was light, and so there has to be, when there is chaos in our life, we have to pause and stop right there in order to regain reflection for moving forward. And if we're speaking specifically about Jesus, Scripture tells us over and over again that he would get up early in the morning to go and be with the Father. Sometimes his disciples didn't even know where he was, and so it would be good for us to wonder, well, what was the gain, right? Because we're always looking to see what is our gain in that. And we don't know it until we actually experience it. So certainly setting ourselves up to work from rest versus resting from work, which is what the world tells us to do, gives us a different spirit and energy from which we can give what is best from us. Obviously, there's, we'll get to a bigger conversation of what that looks like even on a regular basis. But I think understanding that God created us with a rhythm, and that rhythm gains productivity that is greater than perhaps we can begin to understand.
It's interesting, actually, that you referred to Genesis, because I think when we look at the order of how Genesis describes creation, it's interesting that you had the creation of Adam and Eve on the sixth day, and then the seventh day was the Sabbath. So their first experience of their first full day was the day of rest. So that really bears out what you're saying. And then after that, in Genesis 2, it says that God put them to work in the garden. And so, we sometimes, I think, because of the way that our culture can enslave us to work, we sometimes think that work was part of the curse of the fall, but clearly it isn't. Work existed before the fall, and there is a fulfillment and a purpose and a vision and a joy in work, and God created us to work. But if you're looking at that rhythm in that creation narrative, then the work came out of rest. And I think there was something in the fall. I mean, when you look at the story of the fall, then it's by the sweat of your brow and with thorns and thistles. So there's something else that comes into work with the curse of the fall, which I don't know what you call it. You might call it toil. The fact that work has an unpleasant aspect to it, which is, which has pain associated with it. But and so that's part of the fall. But I think you see the joy of work most. Jesus said, "Unless you become like a child, you can't enter the kingdom of heaven." I think you see the joy of work most when you see children. I mean, the work of children is to learn to be adults, and the way that they do that, in the way that God's created humankind, is through play. And so the work of children is play. And I think you see a little picture in children of the way that we're supposed to engage with work. It's like you get children say during their vacation time when they've got something going on that they're really into, and they'll get up in the morning and they can barely wait to get back to. I remember when I was a kid, I had one summer vacation where I had some friends that lived on my street, and we had a season where we were just building camps in the little woods behind where we lived. And I remember, I must have been about 8 or 9, and I remember every morning waking up in the morning, and I just could not wait to get out of bed, get dressed, and get out there with my friends so that we could carry on building these camps. And it was like that was if you like the work that was ahead of me for the day. And there was just such a joy in it. It was like, yes, this is what I really want to do. I was so excited when I woke up in the morning. And I think that we are designed to work, but also we're designed to work out of a place of rest. Sabbath came first, and then he put them to work in the garden. So, yeah, I think
Yeah.
I'm just agreeing with you, I guess. But yeah.
Yeah, if I could jump in and give just a very, real life example for those who have been parents for the first time, you know how hard it is to work without rest,
Oh, yeah.
right? That, the circadian clock is off on that child because they've lived in darkness for so long. And that first year, I mean, it is a nightmare. Even when you think that child has got it down after that first month, yes, they're sleeping a little bit. There's still those growth spurts, right? Those interruption of sleep. And when parents wake up in the morning, I mean, the body recognizes that it did not get full rest.
Yeah.
I remember we sleep trained our child at 5 months because we were just hustling all day trying to make that day. And we just prayed for the day to end. When the morning started, we just prayed for the day to end because we were so exhausted. But once we sleep trained him, and all due respect for all those who, agree or disagree, it was a blessing for us. It just changed our rhythm of healthy living. We were, I loved my husband more. I loved my child more. I loved myself more because of it. And the work that we were doing, it was actually getting fulfilled. So real life example of what it means, to not work from rest versus to do it.
Those predictable patterns, when you said you sleep trained your child, those predictable patterns they're really important for the sense of security for a child. But actually, predictable patterns God has sewn into the rhythms of rest and work on lots of different levels, hasn't he? So he's sewn it in on a daily basis, so we have night and day. But then also on a weekly basis because of the Sabbath. So there's this pattern of working for 6 days and then having a day of rest. And we know, that there have been various different regimes around the world. For example, the Soviet regime back, when communism was in full force, tried to change away from a 6-day work and 1 day off pattern because they felt that it was based on the Judeo-Christian tradition and they didn't like it. And what they found when they tried to change to other patterns is they just didn't work. People just lost their productivity. They lost it. So they ended up having to go back to a 6-day working and 1 day off pattern. And so that's kind of interesting. It's almost like it's a hardwired pattern of that kind of rest. And then, of course, God's also put the seasons in. And there are seasons of summer and winter where basically the whole world around us kind of is full of life and growth and everything. And then there's a season where it kind of rests. And I think our culture tries to get us to power through all of that. Instead of allowing what God's put in there to guide us. And I think these predictable patterns are things that if we actually listen to them and take them on, they can really help us in all sorts of ways, and not just raising our children, but also in managing the way that we live in terms of rest and retreat and productivity. So, yeah, I think that's something that God is clearly, not just through Scripture, but even through creation, he's nudging us all the time about these things, isn't he?
So, Paul, you mentioned, Paul, you guys have both been using this language of rhythm, of pattern, and we're talking about work and rest. I haven't heard us talk about balance yet, because that's a huge thing, right? In our culture, it's like work-life balance, but you all are talking about patterns and rhythms. Tell me more about what are those patterns then of someone living a healthy life?
Yeah, one of my mentors, John Chandler, who was leading Uptick, the ministry that we run before me, always hated it when anyone said balance, because he said trying to get a balance is almost impossible. It's like the picture of someone on a tightrope, isn't it? And so we try to avoid the idea of balance, because trying to get a balance is very difficult, whereas embracing rhythms is much easier, isn't it? So rather than talk a lot about work-life balance. We tend to talk about rhythms of rest and work. So yeah, you pick that up, James, and I think that's just the language that we tend to use. I do think that you have to you have to think about what your boundaries are, and I think that you work for me anyway. Because of the way that God seemed to sew in rest and work. And the way that you see it modeled with Jesus as well. There are all sorts of times in the Gospels where Jesus was being incredibly productive. Tons of people crowding around them. They've got full-on revival going on. And Jesus does very counterintuitive things. It's like, if you've got like 20,000 people and everyone's pressing in, and there aren't many pastors that say, okay, it's time for us to head out now. Let's leave all these people and go to a completely different region. It's like, what? What are you doing? And Jesus is like, yeah, we need some time together just to rest up now and have some time and hang out. And he's not driven by the accolades or the approval or the crowds. He's driven by what the Spirit is telling him to do. And so he's following these rhythms of rest and work. For me, working from rest means that I think about rest first. And my experience today has been a bit different from yours, James. It's different for me because I have a different job for you. I probably have more freedom now at the age that I am to define my schedule. But I've been working at the church I work at this morning, and they'd asked me to stay to help them. We had our preaching collaboration meeting before this, and it's based on some work that I've been doing on Elijah. So they'd asked me, I wasn't actually preaching, but they'd asked me to stay to help them to flesh out that stuff.
Yeah.
And that was fine. But I'd actually said, I can stay, but I can only stay till midday. I can't stay till the end of the meeting at 1. Okay. And the reason for that is because I am going to come home and I'm going to have lunch and sit down and have a rest before I do an hour and a half of podcast stuff. Yeah. And the thing is, they know me well enough that they weren't going to push back hard on that because I'm committed to working from rest. And so one of my little rhythms is I don't get it every day. There are some really super busy days. We all have those. Yeah. But my default, I think a lot of the rhythms are about having a default button. So there's lots of times where I'm just about to do an Uptick retreat next week. That will be I'll be doing stuff pretty full on from 8 a.m. till 9 p.m. all week. It'll be a really busy week. It'll be a fantastic week, but it's not going to be a restful week for me. Yeah. Hopefully it will be for some of the people who are doing the retreat with us. But as I'm running it, it's going to be very busy. Yeah. But there's a default button, and the default button for me, one of the rhythms for me is at least 3 days out of the week, I have a full hour at lunchtime. That has been hard won. That is not our culture here in America. That is not that is not the work culture. And it's not the work culture of the church I'm at either, although it is for some people now because I've been there for a while and I've been pushing it. But there are things like that. It means there's a time in the middle of the day. I was convicted when I was reading Daniel about Daniel, and he didn't pray twice a day. He prayed 3 times a day. It wasn't just morning and evening. He had time in the middle of the day. And there's this little time in the middle of the day where I can take some time out. I'm privileged because I'm a pastor. I have more flexibility than some people in their jobs. There's pros and cons, aren't there? We also have more to do in the evenings often than other jobs. Yeah. So that's just an example from today. I came back, I actually cut one meeting slightly, came back early, so I had some time to have some lunch and rest a bit before we came into this podcast. But I think you're thinking about your day, you're thinking about your week, you're thinking about your season, and you're thinking about what are the rhythms of rest from which then I'm going to work. And working hard is important, working hard is part of what God's called us to, but are we doing it from rest?
Yeah, that's fascinating because that is very countercultural that you would take a moment before the busy season, you take a moment of rest, right? Like you would assume like that's where you should be ramping up and actually rest after that. But what we're saying is that there's something else happening. And Archie, you look like you were about to say something. So I wanted to just people can't see your face, but I saw it, and I'm like, man, I want Archie to chime in on this.
Yeah, I wanted to speak to that point of balance. That you're absolutely right. There are books, webinars. I mean, a whole load of resources out there that talk about work-life balance. But the reality is that different people in different spheres are busier in some seasons than in others, right? And so recognizing that during that busiest season that you're expected to have balance, it's one of those expectations that are simply unreachable, right? And so what does that cause you to feel? Guilt, right? Guilt and shame and disappointment in yourself, and all those things are not from God. That they hinder you from feeling as though what you are doing is good and is good work, right? And so that's why using the word of rhythm is a recognition that there are seasons. Paul pointed to creation. Last year, I started growing strawberries, and I have learned so much through the growing of plants that that my strawberries, they're different species, but during the month of August and September, they're just bursting out plants. The fruit, and it takes a long time to get there, but then they have a season of dormancy, and I have to protect them and cover them to make sure that the root doesn't freeze. But the point is that if creation has a rhythm, right, in order to bear really good fruit, then our lives as well. It doesn't matter what our work may be. We can work in the mines. We can work as accountants. We can work as pastors. The housing market is great right now, and so the realtors are jumping into this season, right? Recognizing, hey, this is my season, and so recognizing that those rhythms have an impact on our life without negatively affecting our relationship with God and our soul, or even our value as individuals, is really important, because I don't think that God intended, again, for work to be a negative impact on humanity. He always called us to work. And so what does it look like to honor God in the work that we've been doing, and to feel honored in the work that we do, without all these other negative emotions that are told to us that we ought to feel when we are out of balance.
So what I heard you all say is that there are some moments that we take throughout our days where we intentionally say, I'm not going to do this. Talk more about that. You guys have been saying, like, in this work rest rhythm, that there's a sense that some things we don't do, some things are not helpful. I just would love to hear more on that.
I'll make reference to the phrasing that I learned through John Chandler as well, Paul's predecessor. He alluded to it, Paul alluded to it, but he would say consistently, divert daily, withdraw weekly, and abandon annually. I would say, and something that was useful to me while I was pastoring, was quit quarterly. Church functions in quarters, and sometimes, after Christmas, take off in January. After Easter, take off after Easter. In the summer, take off in September. Like all those little things, whatever works for you. Find a way where you can divert daily, whatever that looks like. Does that mean coffee out in your front or backyard alone? Withdraw weekly. Does that mean not picking up your phone or checking emails of any kind? It doesn't have to be specifically to work, because sometimes our personal email puts us to work and distracts us from the things that we can be doing, right?
Yeah.
Those weekend promos, and then abandon annually. What does it look like to step away from whatever season or whatever busyness? For a long time, there was that pull for Christmas for people to not buy the presents, to just be with family, and even give things that you already owned away, getting rid of stuff, donating stuff. And so for some people, that's what that means, right? You don't give in to the culture that is demanding more, right? You're abandoning annually so that you can embrace who you are, who God has called you to be, the people who love you, who you love, and to really meditate on what's important. And then, like I said, quit quarterly. If it means resting from a really heavy season, then do that, And for some people, it's taking yourself physically out into a place of vacation and rest. But for some people, it's about staying home because you're going out all the time. So it's really individual, and with the people with whom you live.
Yeah, that's so good. That's so good. Paul, anything?
Yeah, I think Archie, you're hitting on those rhythms and the way that you can do that, and that's so important. I think another thing and another aspect of this is, I do think as well, and perhaps this fits with the kind of quit part of it, is pruning stuff out is really important as well. I remember there was a time when I was leading a large church in the UK, and my job just got so busy, and I just have all these emails coming in all the time, all these things I was responsible for, and I found that it was really helpful about 3 times a year to sit down for a morning and ask the question, of all the things that I'm doing, what should I be doing? What should somebody else be doing? And what should nobody be doing? And basically going and doing a cull of the things, the activities that I was engaged in. And sometimes, and we'd also do that with the things that we were doing as a church. And sometimes that even meant we needed to put down some things that seemed to be reasonably fruitful. We just felt that the Lord was saying, put that down for a season. And I really feel that there's a key passage in terms of Jesus' teaching on this in John 15. It's very familiar, I know, to a lot of you. It's a long passage because it's 17 verses. I won't read all of it, but there's a little bit of it here from the first verse. Jesus says, I'm the true vine, my Father is the gardener. He cuts off every branch in me that bears no fruit, while every branch that does bear fruit, he prunes so that it will be even more fruitful. So notice there, the unfruitful and the fruitful both get cut down. Cut off or cut back. You're already clean because of the word I've spoken to you. Remain in me as I also remain in you. No branch can bear fruit by itself. It must remain in the vine. Neither can you bear fruit unless you remain in me. And there's this process that Jesus seems to give us for fruitfulness. So we've been talking about how rest and work is countercultural from a biblical perspective. But I also think that Jesus' model for fruitfulness is countercultural, because I think that our cultural model for fruitfulness is push until you're fruitful enough.
Yeah.
And Jesus' model is abide in me. And if you abide in me, your experience will be times where the fruit is pruned back and times where the fruit grows, and each time you go through a season of that, you'll see a bigger crop. And I think a lot of us are like a grapevine that's just straining to try to pop out a grape. It's like, if I can just get that grape, and all the grapes come out, and it's like, and I think that's our culture, and I think Jesus is talking about that. I hope that didn't break the microphone.
Paul,
I did that little.
Paul, this is so great. I love this. I'm forever going to remember the sound of someone straining to get a grape out. But go ahead, please. This is so good.
I think Jesus is talking about, they all knew about the cultures of growing grapes, and they would actually prune the branches right back down to the central stalk of the grape, so it's like a little stump, and that means that all the resources, when it's being pruned of that grapevine, are going into the roots, digging down deep into the soil, and one of our other mentors from Uptick, Laura McDaniel, grows grapes, and she tells us you don't irrigate grapes. And the reason for that is you want the roots to go deep. Yeah. They've got to go deep. And then you're going to get a 100-year grapevine, not a 5-year grapevine. So you basically prune back so that the energy goes into the roots going deep, so it will get all the nutrients out of the soil. This is the picture of abiding in Jesus. And then when the time's right, all of those nutrients can be drawn up so that you get really fruitful grapes growing. And I think we have an expectation that we should be grow, whereas Jesus actually is grow, prune, grow, prune.
Mm. This is good. It makes me think of like how do you all begin to recognize, though, as we think about it, Archie, you said the journey is not that easy, but how do we begin to recognize for someone on a very practical level, like when you're too busy and you need to make room for rest? Because if we're kind of hard charged in a culture that says keep going, keep pushing, don't rest, how do you even recognize some of the signs in your own life that, yeah, I may be pushing when I should be pruning?
I'll tell a story because I think it's very telling. Before I joined the Uptick staff, I was pastoring a church, and I had gotten the offer to come work at Uptick, and I said, well, yes, but not yet. But I knew in my spirit that it was time to go, but I was pushing that last grape out, trying to make it work. And I remember Easter Sunday, you put so much energy into that and the expectation of people coming, it's the one time that you get the neighborhood to come out. And I remember driving home with my family and feeling just like I was still in Good Friday. That there was no joy. And I am honest to say there was absolutely no joy in my heart that day. And I think what really God was pressing in and telling me it's time to go.
Wow.
Because the damage that I was going to do in staying was going to be worse than for me to step out, the pain that I was going to feel when I stepped out. Because obviously I love these people, I love the community. And so there was going to be grief, but in staying, I was going to create more damage.
Wow.
For what God was needing to do in that space. I recently heard an acronym that someone used for ego. And the acronym is edging God out.
Yeah.
And so I think when we think of that, is my ego getting in the way of God's obedience? Am I edging God out so that I can feel some sort of validation? And obviously this is a journey. I think it requires a lot of prayer, a lot of hearing God's voice and recognizing what that looks like. But surely, and trusting God's faithfulness for the next season. So, I don't think I can answer your question specifically because I think every story is so individual. But perhaps saying, if you feel like you're edging God out, listen up,
Yeah. I think another couple of indicators I've noticed is when you start to feel resentful in the things that you're doing for people, that's definitely a red flag that you may have overextended or carried on doing things for too long. Another one is I think when you think back to the Apostle Paul says, pressing towards the goal, I take hold of that for which Christ took hold of me. And I think that there can come a point, particularly if you're somebody maybe in ministry, but even if you're in some other walk of life, I think as a Christian, there can come a point where you kind of remember back to when you were, walking with the Lord first and the kind of things that God put on your heart. And you kind of think, I don't really feel like I'm taking hold of that for which Christ took hold of me. I feel like I'm not at the center of what really the call is on my life. Again, to me, that's at the very least a yellow flag. It's like, and I think for people in ministry, that can often happen, that what happens is that the church, that for which the church takes hold of you, even as a pastor, is not that for which the Lord took hold of you. Like the Lord might have taken hold of you for the Great Commission, to reach out to the last, the least, and the lost, a visionary thing. And the church might actually take hold of you for more of a kind of chaplaincy job.
Wow.
Or, and I'm not saying that chaplaincy isn't a good thing. It can be an amazing thing. But if all you're doing is being a chaplain to God's people, not in a church setting, not in a setting where chaplaincy has been designed for, but you're just in an inward looking setting, then you're then it may be that actually the church itself has replaced actually the call of God, and you have to recalibrate there. So sometimes it can be those sorts of things, I think, that can be the kind of wake up call that things need to be pruned or things need to change.
Yeah. Wow. It's good. It's good. That's so good. So I almost want to go to the other side then of what advice then do you give to someone who actually decides, you know what, I'm going to lean into this rest. Like even I'm thinking about personally, I'm listening to this conversation and in my mind, I'm like, you know what, today I've got a ton more meetings, but I need a moment. I need some time just to rest, to recharge. And I know that, right? Fundamentally, I know it. What do you say to the person who feels guilty for like, man, I'm taking this rest or I'm slowing down? How do you address that?
What I would say is that this is really about faith. Jesus said that if you abide in him, he'll make you fruitful. And do you remember in the story of Daniel when he didn't want to eat the food that the Babylonians ate because it wasn't kosher?
Yeah.
He asked the guard to test him. He said, just test me for a couple of weeks and just feed me vegetables and see whether I'm healthy or not. And the guard gave him the vegetables, and after a couple of weeks, he was actually healthier than all the people that was eating all the meat. So he said, okay, we'll do this. What I would say is, if you're feeling guilty, it's probably because you're feeling like you won't be as productive or you won't do as good a job or all those things. It's probably more complex than that under the surface, but at least at a surface level reason, What I would say is, why not go on a little faith journey with the Lord and say, all right, Lord, I'm going to do a little Daniel test here. I'm going to step out in faith. I'm going to trust you that if I do what you say and I actually put some time into abiding and start to move the culture away, I start to be the head and not the tail, like God said to his people in Deuteronomy. I'm going to take authority over the culture here, and I'm going to start to work from rest. Let me see whether I actually become more productive rather than less productive. Let me see whether I still get the things done that need to get done. Let me see whether I get breakthrough. And because the thing is, there's no point in doing this just out of a sense of duty.
Yeah.
There's no point in doing it just out of laziness, just because you want more time off. The point of this is that any time we engage with a Jesus-shaped life, we're doing it out of faith, aren't we? We're doing it because we think it's what Jesus is calling us to do. So if you're doing it out of faith, what that does is it activates the supernatural power of God into your life. That's the reality. And who doesn't need the supernatural power of God into our energy and productivity? Yeah. I know I do. And the thing is that almost always the way that God calls us to do that, which is, it's always through going to the cross, is it's always counterintuitive. So it's weird that the mechanism God's given us for activating his energy and productivity into our lives is to trust him enough to put rest in and to work from rest.
Yeah.
So I think that's what I would say to someone who's struggling with maybe feeling guilty about it, is I'd say, this is not about making you less productive. This is about making you more productive. Why don't you go on the faith journey and see what God does?
It's good. It's good. Archie, anything to add?
Yeah, I would, if you're, if you need to see things, visualize things, I would say make two lists: what is urgent and what is important. And then what is important can always wait, I think. Right? You're determining what is important. So I'm not telling you what is important or what is urgent, but then from your urgent list, I would ask, what would you lose if you asked for help on this? what would you lose if you asked for help? Because sometimes it's a matter of pride, right? Our list may be full of lots of things to do, and we may see it all as urgent, but we aren't willing to ask for help. So we want to do it all, either because we want to control the situation, or because we think no one else could do it as good as us, or even, in the worst case scenarios, we have a sick family member at home or whatever. Is there someone that we could ask for help on this family issue, right? So what would you lose if you asked for help? And then analyze, what would you gain if you did ask for help? I think sometimes when you map it out, then you can see yourself and the trouble that you're creating, also the patterns that you're setting out for yourself, and that other people may be modeling, after you, if you're the leader in a specific organization or whatever. I think remembering that your influence, and you paint a picture of the expectations for other people serving under you, or next to you, or whatever that setup may be. So I think it's really important to remember that it's not just about us, but other people in that space, and knowing that we miss blessings when we don't invite people into spaces of service to us. So to your point, James, for the next meetings that you have, what would you lose if you could reschedule them so you could have lunch, right? What would you gain? You'd gain lunchtime. But what would you lose if you just rescheduled them for another day, what is urgent, what is important? Because we don't have to grind ourselves to the ground in order to be productive and fruitful. That's counterproductive.
Yeah, it's good. It's so good. Well, I feel like we are. This is I want to land the plane, because this conversation could go on and on, because there's so much here in terms of untangling ourselves from culture and actually living the Jesus-shaped life. So just as we land the plane, Paul, Archie, are you sensing anything from the Lord in particular that you'd want to share with our listeners?
I think I've been thinking about this as we even prepared the conversation, but I've been thinking a lot about that new parent who is working, who is managing household, who is trying to manage life, and desiring that balance. My prayer is that in listening to our conversation, one, that they would be willing to assess their life in this season and to be gracious to themselves, because whatever this new season is, it is hard, and because it is hard, recognizing that help matters. After becoming a parent, I remember every mother that I've seen, in their season of pregnancy, I have always told them, if you need anything, I want you to know, come and I will help you, because the journey is hard and lonely as a new parent, and you don't need to feel that way. So I've just, very aware, hyper aware of new parents in ministry and just how hard this season can be. Don't do it alone. Don't do it. It's not worth it in the end. This first year is to be enjoyed and loved. So don't do it alone.
So good. Good. Paul, anything?
I don't know whether this is a picture that's helpful for anybody, but I was reminded of a picture that somebody once shared with me, and it's a picture of a cup, like a big coffee mug or something like that, and the size of the mug is a picture of somebody's capacity, so how much liquid you can fit in the mug. Somebody's character is what you find in the bottom of the mug when it's empty. And the sense I had was that maybe there might be someone or some people listening who are feeling discouraged because they're feeling like they're not expressing or modeling or living the godliness that they're used to. And actually what's going on isn't that they're less godly than they used to. What's going on is that their life now is draining their capacity in a way that it never used to. The cup used to be 3/4 full. Now the cup is pretty much empty. And so that what's going on is they're actually discovering what was at the bottom of the mug the whole time. Obviously that's hard. And we have seasons of our life that really do drain our capacity. But the advantage of that is that once you find that once those things are revealed, then that means that God can deal with those things with us.
Yeah.
But you do actually have to then go and give him the time and the space to be able to do that. And you have to make yourself vulnerable to others so God can use others to help us to deal with those things. So I felt like there was maybe a word of encouragement that this wasn't about backsliding or it was about the circumstances revealing what's been there, and that's actually part of God's plan for us. But that the next step was probably to make some space in the kind of ways we've been talking about and find others who can help us so that we actually don't leave those things unattended to, but then deal with them.
So good. So good. Well, I hope that you all were on the journey of me experiencing some spiritual direction and spiritual coaching. I hope y'all enjoyed me kind of sharing my busy life, but also being able to say, hey, how do we slow down a little bit to hear from God? We talked about that last episode, but this episode just saying, okay, what are the rhythms that we need to have in place? And so as you're going about your day, I just want to encourage you to consider, what are the rhythms that God is inviting you into? What are the rhythms that are going to lead to a healthy and a fruitful life, that work and that rest cycle? If you want more information about that, if you want to explore that a little bit more, I'd love for you to meet us over at uptick.org. We'd love to have more of a conversation with you. You can also find us on social media. We'd love to talk more about what that looks like to live in a more healthy rhythm. And so I also want you to like, share, subscribe, make sure that you rate and review this. Share this with someone like me who needs to find ways to slow down. Share this with people that you know who may be not just in ministry, but just busy in other arenas that could benefit from this. I hope that this blessed you. We're looking forward to you jumping in the next episode where we're going to talk a little bit more on how do we live out this Jesus-shaped life. So hope you guys enjoyed it. Love you. We'll talk to you later.